Time to wrap this little experiment up. By the time you see this, Season 2 will already be over. And my bad, I guess, for not realizing all those changes from the PTR, including Sombra, would drop into the main game before the season ended. I intended to make one last episode detailing some matches after achieving Master Rank, but there were just so many new and exciting changes, so much I wanted to experiment with, I couldn't tear myself away from... Well, that's what I would like to say, but here's what really happened. I started off climbing a little bit past 3550, but as I kept playing each day without taking any time to review and reflect on my mistakes, I fell back into that meat grinder mentality, which includes feeling so burned by a points deficit that I would refuse to accept reality and keep queuing up to get those points back, instead of doing the clearly smart thing and just take a break. At one point, I fell back down below 3400. In my introduction video for this series, I made sure to clarify that my metric for success wasn't just achieving Master Rank, but staying there. If I couldn't do that, I'd just be matching my same level of performance from Season 1. Sure enough, with less than 2 weeks to go in the season, I had already blown that chance, and I had validated my own fears. I've played over 25 matches since the last episode, and thankfully I did manage to barely get back to Master at 3505. But nowhere during that whole process did I have the discipline to take the time to stop and think about why I was regressing, much less failing to progress. So with all that in mind, this is still a series about playing Zenyatta, and this is still meant to be a learning experience for both myself and you watching. So it's time to assess the main aspects about playing Zen at a competitive level that I've learned along the way, as well as the things I'm still struggling to comprehend. Number 1. Transcendence shouldn't always be reserved for countering enemies' ultimates. It's also justifiable in now or never situations, just to prevent teammates from dying. There's no doubt that during the course of a round, your team's push can either live or die by how and when you use your ultimate. Their ultimates are the things that they can use to kill your pushes, and you have a tool to nullify them. Playing Zen for any decent length of time will trigger some automatic responses after a while without requiring you to necessarily focus or react, like when a Genji pulls out his sword, or Zarya fires a Graviton. You just know that now is the time to press Q and totally ruin their plans. That said, if you get into the mindset of holding onto your ultimate for just those situations, you'll be rightfully chastised by the rest of your team for holding onto it when it could have made the difference in a fight. This is especially true during overtime situations, where your team can't really afford any losses, regardless of how they happen. Everyone on both sides is going to throw all their cards on the table in these situations, so it's only fair that you do the same. Number 2. There's a difference between positioning yourself at a safe distance and isolating yourself from the rest of your team. It can be tempting to find a nice quote-unquote hiding spot as Zen and still do your job. After all, you're still keeping line of sight with your teammates, and you're so far back or hidden that an enemy would really have to go out of their way after getting past the front line just to deal with you. I used to think that this was the ideal spot for defending the first point of King's Row, for example. But how difficult is it really for any of the mobile flanking offense heroes to get to you and single you out? Do you really want to risk getting picked first? Sure, there's always the possibility of you nailing some lucky discorded headshots and winning that 1v1, but think about how quickly a team fight will fall apart if you get picked off with little to no effort. Now your team has less survivability and damage output, and will probably be forced to either fall back or get rushed down. You're always going to have to position yourself relative to where your team is anyway, so more often than not, you're better off sticking next to teammates. Not like directly next to them like glue, because then the risk of getting picked off unnecessarily by the frontline crossfire goes way up, but still close enough that you can be firing on all cylinders with supporting damage, healing, and discording. Plus, you need to be next to your team for Transcendence anyway. If you're way in the back when you see a Reaper drop in and surprise your whole team with a Death Blossom, you aren't going to make it in time to save them. It's the difference between being a hero and looking like a fool. Number 3. If you're playing with a Lucio, always coordinate ult usage so they don't overlap. Man, how many times did this happen to me during this series? Must have been at least half a dozen. I shouldn't really need to go over why Zen and Lucio popping their ults at the same time is a bad thing, but if this series has been any indication, just because you know when you should be doing something doesn't mean you'll always remember to. I personally recommend waiting until one of your ults is ready to go before bringing it up. If you want to talk strategy before the round starts, that's fine, but you're just going to be speculating about which heroes the enemy team is running. If you spent time explaining how Lucio should save his ult for Tracer's ult or Junkrat's ult, That's less time you have to explain the more important point, which is that regardless of which ult prompts the both of you to want to press Q, you have to agree beforehand about who's going to do it first. Something as simple as just, hey, we both have our ults. When we're in danger, use yours first and I'll save mine for later. That's plenty. It doesn't have to be a super detailed or specific plan, and it'll be fresher in both of your minds if you wait to bring it up until both of you have ults to use in the first place. Number 4. You should adapt to whatever your team's strategy is, even if you personally disagree with it. It's true that in the pro scene, most teams assign their Lucio player the role of shot caller. They come up with strategies on the fly and direct the rest of the team to follow it. Lucio players can get away with this though because they're generally not a very active participant in battles. They can devote more of their mental resources to surveying the entire situation. And obviously they're also playing the character that ultimately determines when to push by using speed boost. When you're playing Zen, you don't really have that luxury because your focus constantly needs to shift between attacking enemies and healing teammates. If no one is speaking up or making suggestions, then by all means feel free to say something simple like, hey, let's go right, or let's bait out this maze ice wall before we push in. Otherwise, you just need to go with your team's flow. In the absence of well-formulated pre-game strategy, which is all you're going to get in solo queue, unfortunately, it's actually your tanks who dictate where to go. They're the ones providing the rest of your team safe passage. And even if you disagree with the rest of your team pushing really far forward while defending objectives, they've committed to this idea, so you might as well give them the best chance of succeeding as possible. If your Genji wants to pull out his sword right next to their spawn, you'd better at least give him a Harmony Orb. He may have just made a really cocky, costly, and suicidal decision, but only if he committed to going it alone. Never forget your role as a support. Number 5. The meta is always changing. Play Zen if you want to, but don't fight your team about it. And finally, the sin I'm most guilty of. This entire series revolves around Zenyatta, and I never made any intentions of playing anyone else this season, but no matter how effective a hero can be at times, maining one single hero for the game's entire lifespan is a foolish endeavor. You probably heard that advice quite a bit leading up to the game's release. A flexible player who can fill multiple roles well is so much more valuable than a player who specializes in one hero exclusively. They may be exceptionally good at that hero, but that value only lasts as long as the game's balance stays that way. And with how this game has been going, you can't go 2 months without huge balance changes. Whenever my team had a rough start, it was a fairly common response to scrutinize the hero composition to try to identify the weak links. And ever since the nerf to Orb of Discord a few months ago, Zen has slowly become a primary target for blame. We need an Ana, we need a Lucio. And well, I turned a blind eye to these remarks most of the time. I'd warn them that I'm far less experienced playing anyone other than Zen, but I'd switch anyway just to appease them, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Sure enough, it never made a difference. But hey, maybe it would have made a difference if I was just more experienced filling those roles. Point being, I hope you aren't watching this series thinking that playing Zenyatta exclusively is the most effective means for climbing the ranks. I've shown that it's possible, but I've also shown it's far from a straightforward path to success. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a fair amount of luck, and your decision making pretty much has to be on point every single second. I'd love nothing more than a sudden influx of awesome Zenyatta players, but there's no getting around the fact that his place in the meta right now is questionable. Well, everyone's place is questionable right now since the Sombra update is still fresh, but that's beside the point. When I say you should be flexible and adapt to your team's strategy, I'm not just talking about their positioning on the map. Sometimes that means changing from Zenyatta to someone else. He'll be a top pick again someday, but if you want your value as a player to last longer than a single season, you should main a role and not just a hero. If you have any comments or questions about anything in this video, or any other video in the series, you can leave a comment below or directly contact me on Twitter at _UncleAJ. Even if you don't have anything to say though, I'd be truly humbled just to know that you've taken the time to watch, and I sincerely hope you got something useful out of this experience. And Zenyatta or not, I'm not stopping with Overwatch anytime soon, so feel free to check out my live streams at twitch.tv/uncle_AJ. Thank you.